In the heart of suburban Georgia, the Maplewood Homeowners Association, HOA, believed they had struck gold. They had just completed the construction of 96 dream homes, a project they touted as the crown jewel of the county. But unbeknownst to them, the real owner of the land was waiting, and they had unwittingly walked right into her trap. Margaret Whitman, a 62-year-old retired school administrator, awoke one summer morning to find her family's land, nearly 40 acres that had been passed down through generations, covered in brand new houses. For Margaret, this land was not just dirt and grass, it was history. She remembered chasing fireflies as a child, her father's voice echoing in her mind, reminding her that land was the one thing they couldn't make more of. Even when developers ignored her property and neighbors sold off their plots, she remained steadfast, paying her taxes on time and keeping meticulous records. One fateful afternoon, as she drove past her property, she spotted a bulldozer tearing into the earth. Initially thinking it was routine county work, she returned a week later to find survey stakes and construction crews pouring concrete. Panic set in as she learned that the HOA was building Maplewood Estates, a new subdivision that encroached on her land. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" she asked a worker in a neon vest. "New subdivision, ma'am," he replied, barely looking up. 90-something homes going up. Gonna be beautiful. Her heart sank. Surely, someone had double-checked the records. But as the weeks passed, houses began to rise, and Margaret felt the weight of her family's legacy slipping away. When she shared her plight with friends at church, some dismissed her concerns. "They can't just build without asking," one woman said. But Margaret knew better. She had the documents to prove it. What she didn't know was that the HOA had assumed her land was unused due to a clerical error decades ago. They had swooped in, purchased adjacent lots, and extended their reach without realizing that nearly 40 acres were still under private ownership. To them, it was a blank canvas. To Margaret, it was her legacy. As families moved into their shiny new homes, Margaret didn't react with anger. Instead, she calculated her next steps. Each evening, she spread out her documents, circling dates and drafting letters with her attorney, Samuel Drake. "They're sitting on my property," she said quietly, her resolve hardening. She knew that once the court saw her records, there would be no question of ownership. Margaret had always been proactive, a trait that served her well during her decades as a school administrator. Long before the bulldozers arrived, she had made it a habit to review property tax records in downtown Macon. "Mrs. Whitman, you're one of the few who still comes in person," a clerk teased. "That's because I don't like surprises," she replied with a smile. 3 years before the HOA's project began, she had consulted Samuel about potential survey disputes. "Developers are circling this county like hawks," she warned. Samuel was impressed with her meticulous records. "You've got receipts, maps, and even your dad's handwritten notes," he said. "I've been ready since '88, she replied dryly. As construction progressed, Margaret documented everything. She snapped photos, marked down dates, and even videotaped the activity. "Noise fades, paperwork doesn't," she told her cousin Thomas, who questioned why she wasn't making a scene. With every week that passed, her case grew stronger. Meanwhile, the HOA celebrated their success, believing they had built a thriving community. Clifford Matthews, the HOA president, boasted about the project to local papers, but behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. Margaret wasn't just another retiree. She was a woman who had prepared for this moment. As the first families moved in, Margaret's resolve only deepened. She sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, which they dismissed with laughter. "This woman thinks she's going to scare us with paperwork," Clifford scoffed. But Margaret wasn't bluffing. Samuel filed a lawsuit, attaching every document she had meticulously saved. The lawsuit landed on the HOA's desk like a hammer. Margaret's meticulous records painted a clear picture of ownership, while the HOA's arguments began to crumble. As the first families settled into their new homes, whispers of Margaret's claims spread through the community. Some homeowners began to question their own security. Victor and Angela Ramirez, who had saved for years to buy their first home, found themselves caught in the crossfire. "What if the judge rules against us?" Angela whispered one night. Victor clenched his jaw. "Then we fight for compensation. We didn't build this, we're victims too." As tensions rose, Clifford tried to reassure the homeowners. "Trust me, we're solid," he insisted, but his confidence was waning. The emotional toll weighed heavily on the families, and the community began to fracture. Some blamed Margaret for their predicament, while others recognized her as the rightful owner. The courtroom battle loomed, and when the day finally arrived, the courthouse was packed. Margaret sat calmly, her documents neatly organized beside her. Samuel began with clarity, presenting Margaret's case with unwavering conviction. "This is not speculation, this is theft," he declared. As witnesses confirmed Margaret's ownership, the tide began to turn. When Margaret took the stand, she spoke with quiet strength. "My parents worked themselves to the bone to buy that land. I didn't build those houses, I didn't invite those families there. The HOA made that choice." The judge's ruling came down like thunder. The court recognizes Mrs. Whitman as the rightful owner of the property on which the Maplewood Estates subdivision was built. Gasps filled the room, and Margaret closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer of gratitude. While the families were not immediately displaced, their futures remained uncertain. Margaret had won the battle, but the war was far from over. As she walked her property line with Thomas, she felt a sense of peace. "Daddy told me to never let this go," she said softly. In the weeks that followed, the community grappled with the fallout. Families faced uncertainty, and Margaret's story became a parable of resilience and courage. She had stood up against a powerful institution and emerged victorious, reminding everyone that strength doesn't always shout, and justice doesn't always come quickly. As the sun set over Maplewood Estates, Margaret knew that while the road ahead would be challenging, she had preserved her family's legacy. And in doing so, she had shown that ordinary people could stand against the odds and reclaim what was rightfully theirs.